As we delve deeper into the mysterious life of the Queen of the Nile, we arrive at a point where the conflict between Cleopatra and her brother, Ptolemy XIV, whom she was forced to marry, reaches a critical juncture. Meanwhile, their ambitious sister Arsinoe tries to take Cleopatra's place. Arsinoe approaches the priest of the Temple of Delphi and asks him to facilitate their divorce so that she can marry her brother and become the Queen of Egypt. But is Cleopatra's beauty and power enough to keep her on the throne? Stay with us to hear this fascinating story. Cleopatra had a sister named Arsinoe. From childhood, it was noticed that Arsinoe bore a great resemblance to Cleopatra. And as she grew older, the resemblance became even more striking. However, Cleopatra's mannerisms and gestures were different from Arsinoe's. Cleopatra's gestures were elegant and regal. When she spoke, the movement of her head and hands revealed her royal heritage as the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. In contrast, Arsinoe reminded people of the women who washed clothes by the banks of the Nile. In every way, Cleopatra outshone Arsinoe, until the day Cal told me that Cleopatra was the most beautiful woman in Egypt. Until then, I had always defended Cleopatra's beauty. But after Cal overcame me, my heart withered. Even then, I had to admit deep down that Cleopatra was more beautiful than me. Cleopatra's beauty was a Greek beauty. She had dark eyebrows, black hair, hazel eyes, and her large nose was balanced by her small mouth. Meanwhile, I had the beauty of an Egyptian woman, a classic Egyptian face. And of course, Egyptian beauty could never compare to Greek beauty. Yet, I never expected Cal to tell me so bluntly that Cleopatra was more beautiful than I was. After Ptolemy XIII passed away, I realized that a rift had developed between Arsinoe and Cleopatra. The first reason for this rift was Arsinoe's complaint. Why did they give Cleopatra to my brother? Why didn't they give me? Who am I, deprived of becoming queen? I heard Arsinoe say, "The Pharaoh of Egypt has never looked at my sister as a woman he must one day marry." When Arsinoe realized that a conflict had arisen between Cleopatra and her brother, she was delighted. As I mentioned earlier, the conflict stemmed from Cleopatra claiming that the pharaoh was weak and incapable, and that she could not accept him as her husband. On the other hand, Ptolemy XIV complained that Cleopatra refused to submit to him as his wife. When Arsinoe saw this discord between Cleopatra and her brother, she became hopeful. She visited the priest at the Temple of Delphi in Alexandria, a man renowned for his wisdom in marital matters, and asked him, "Do you think, under these circumstances, their marriage will dissolve?" The priest replied, "It seems that what makes Ptolemy XIV weak and prevents Cleopatra from submitting to him or allowing him into her chambers is their mutual hatred. Because they hate each other, no marital affection arises between them, and without such affection, they cannot fulfill their marital duties." Arsinoe became even more hopeful and asked, "Is it possible for these two to separate so that my brother can marry another woman?" The priest said, "If it can be proven that your brother is impotent, or that Cleopatra refuses to fulfill her marital duties, a decree of annulment will be issued. They will be separated. Your brother can marry another woman, and Cleopatra can marry another man." Arsinoe asked, "If Cleopatra separates from my brother, will I take her place?" The priest replied, "Cleopatra and her brother cannot be separated. because there is no evidence to testify that either party's claims are true. Then he asked, "Can you provide witnesses to prove that one of them is lying?" Arsinoe said, "Cleopatra hates my brother and falsely claims that I am not at fault, while accusing my brother of being impotent. She uses this ploy against him." She continued, "Can we not use one of the women from the pleasure districts to expose Cleopatra's lies?" The priest replied, "Yes, but under the law, the testimony of women from the pleasure districts is inadmissible and will not be accepted." I often wondered why Cleopatra, who did not love her brother, refused to separate from him and allow her sister Arsinoe to marry Ptolemy XIV. Then I thought, perhaps she could not bear to see anyone else as the Queen of Egypt. Or perhaps Cleopatra's claims about Ptolemy XIV's impotence were not baseless. Perhaps she had not failed in her marital duties after all. In any case, Arsinoe's rivalry with her sister over marrying Ptolemy strained their relationship. One day, Arsinoe saw me in the royal palace and said, "Charmian, I need to speak with you," I replied. "My lady, what is your command?" She said, "Come to the orange grove this afternoon, where it is quiet, and I will speak with you there." That afternoon, I went to the orange grove and waited under an orange tree. When she arrived, I stood up out of respect. She took my hand and said, "Charmian, before I tell you what I need, I must ask, do you love me or not?" I said, "My lady, is it possible for anyone here not to love you?" Arsinoe continued, "If you love me, you will carry out the task I entrust to you willingly. But if you do not love me, you will do it without inner satisfaction." I said, "I love you." Arsinoe asked, "Do you also love your mistress, Cleopatra?" I replied, "Yes, I love her." She then said, "I want to give you a task that will benefit both your mistress, Cleopatra, and me. If you succeed in this task and carry it out as I wish, I will buy you from my sister and set you free. Furthermore, I will arrange your marriage to any young man you desire." Arsinoe looked me in the eyes and added, "Charmian, I think you wish to marry the young centurion in the army. I have seen you with him many times. I know you love him. But because you are my sister's slave, you cannot marry him. You do not have the freedom to choose, and my sister, who is fond of you, will not free you, making it impossible for you to become his wife." When Arsinoe said this, I acknowledged the truth of her words. As long as I was Cleopatra's slave, I could not marry Cal. Not only would my mistress never free me, but I also felt that she herself harbored feelings for Cal. The only way I could marry him was to be freed from Cleopatra's service, but I had no money to pay for my freedom. Therefore, I was destined to remain in Cleopatra's service for the rest of my life. I asked, "What is your command?" Arsinoe replied, "You are Cleopatra's trusted servant and confidant. You sleep outside her chamber every night, hearing everything said within. Is that correct?" I answered, "Yes, my lady." She said, "Since you are a slave, your testimony will not be accepted. If you were not a slave, your testimony would have value. But because you are a servant, I am not asking you to testify. Instead, I want you to do something else." She leaned in and whispered, "Allow someone to stay with you for several nights so they can hear everything said in Cleopatra's chamber, just as you do." I asked, "Who is the person I must host in my room?" She replied, "He is the priest of the Temple of Delphi." Arsinoe continued, "You, who sleep every night behind the queen's room and listen to her conversations with my brother, Know well that Cleopatra despises him, and because of this hatred, she will not allow him to become her husband, claiming that he is incapable. This is how she avoids him. Therefore, whenever an opportunity arises for the priest of Delphi to separate them and make their divorce official, it will benefit me. That's why I say, if Cleopatra finds out you have hosted the priest in your room, she will not punish you. She will reward you. And I promise, after my brother and sister are separated, and I marry my brother, I will purchase your freedom from Cleopatra and arrange your marriage with Cal. Her proposal was very intriguing to me. I could host the priest of the Temple of Delphi in my room for a few nights without Cleopatra ever noticing. She never entered my room. She always summoned me to hers. Arsinoe told me, "The priest will listen to Cleopatra's and my brother's conversations and will understand which of them is in the right. Either my brother is incapable, or Cleopatra simply despises him. In either case, the priest who listens with his own ears will be able to pronounce the divorce. This will not harm your queen, and once Cleopatra and her husband are divorced, you will be free to marry Cal." I asked. "When will the priest of the Temple of Delphi arrive?" Arsinoe replied, "Tomorrow night." I then asked, "At what hour?" She said, "Before the palace gates close. He will enter the palace in disguise and come to my quarters. He will stay there until the palace residents are asleep. You must inform me before Cleopatra retires to her chambers, so I can send him to your room." The priest of the Temple of Delphi entered the royal palace as planned and went to Arsinoe's quarters. No one noticed his arrival because he was in disguise. As soon as Cleopatra entered her bedroom and her brother joined her, I went to Arsinoe's quarters and said, "Cleopatra and her brother have gone to bed. If you wish, send the priest to my room." Arsinoe said, "I will send him now. But be careful. No one must find out that the priest of the Temple of Delphi is in your room to listen to Cleopatra and her husband's conversations." I assured her that no one would discover this. Then I prepared a bed near Cleopatra's door for the priest to sleep on and told him to lie down. The priest lay down, but in the darkness, I could see him pressing his ear to Cleopatra's door, trying not to miss a word of what the husband and wife were saying. After some time, the priest lifted his head and said, "From their conversation, it is clear that the husband is not incapable. He is a strong man, but Cleopatra despises him and refuses to have marital relations with him." I responded, "Yes, that's true." The priest said, "What I've learned so far is enough for me to determine my course of action. I now know that Ptolemy XIV desires his wife and is physically capable, but Cleopatra hates him and does not want to be his wife." As the priest finished speaking, something unexpected occurred, something neither I nor Arsinoe nor the priest could have anticipated. Suddenly, the elderly priest began to cough uncontrollably. His coughing was so loud that Cleopatra came out of the adjacent room and called out, "Charmian," I replied, "Yes, my queen." She asked, "Who is coughing?" I had no time to think of a proper response. I was forced to say, "He is the priest of the Temple of Delphi." Cleopatra, astonished, exclaimed, "Did you say the priest of the Temple of Delphi? What is he doing in your room?" I said, "My queen, the priest of the Temple of Delphi traveled on foot from his temple to come here to see you and your brother. But since he arrived late and you were already asleep, I explained to him that no one, not even the priest of the Temple of Delphi, could disturb the Queen of Egypt during her rest. When he arrived, the palace gates were already closed, so he couldn't leave. He asked to stay here for the night so he could meet you and the king in the morning. Knowing your respect for the Temple of Delphi, I granted his request. The elderly priest who was listening to my explanation seemed to approve of it. I could tell he appreciated my efforts to protect him from being held accountable by the queen and king for his presence in the room of one of the palace's maidservants. Cleopatra rose, put on a robe, and her husband did the same. The two of them entered my room. Although the queen recognized the priest, she was still surprised to see him there. Hosting a priest in the room of a maidservant was highly unusual and scandalous. In Egypt, there were many priests across the temples who claimed to dedicate their lives to the gods and never marry. However, many of them secretly had relations with women and sometimes left their temples at night to visit women's homes, returning before dawn. When Cleopatra and her brother entered my room, despite my explanation that the priest had come to see them, I could sense their suspicion. They seemed to believe the priest had come to see me for personal reasons. The priest then addressed them, saying, "Cleopatra, since the death of Ptolemy XIII, some time has passed. You, who married after his death, have not yet had a child. This is surprising, as it is unusual for a young couple to remain childless, especially when such a child would be the heir to Egypt's throne. This has given rise to two rumors. Some say the king is incapable. Others claim the queen does not love him and refuses to be his true wife. I have come to ask, which of these is true?" Cleopatra said, "The fault lies with the king. He cannot fulfill his marital duties." Her brother Ptolemy XIV retorted, "That's not true. It is she who refuses to be my wife, and even insults me." The priest, having heard enough, excused himself to consult the stars. He later returned and declared, "The stars say the fault lies not with the king, but with the queen, who does not wish to be his true wife." 14th said, "Now you confirm that what I said was true." The priest replied, "Yes, what you said was correct." Then he turned to Cleopatra and said, "O daughter of the king of Egypt, the stars in the sky say that you do not wish to be your husband's true wife. And since you will not be his true wife, you will not bear children until after your husband, another ruler, becomes the king of Egypt." Cleopatra remained silent for a moment. Then she said, "Priest, I want to have children, but not from my brother." The priest, astonished, asked, "Why? Could there be a better husband for a woman than her brother?" Cleopatra replied, "We are of Greek origin. My ancestor, Ptolemy I, came to this country from Greece. He arrived here with Alexander, and after Alexander's death, he became the king of Egypt. In Greece, brothers and sisters do not marry each other, and they still do not. This custom of sibling marriage was established here to keep wealth within a single family and prevent it from passing to another. But in reality, the marriage of brother and sister is one of the worst unions." She continued, "My ancestors were strong, beautiful, and healthy men and women. But as we move further from the earliest generations and closer to our own time, we see that our fathers and mothers have become weaker. If our lineage has not completely degenerated, it is only because some of my ancestors, lacking sisters, were forced to marry foreign women. Otherwise, our family would have become even more feeble than the native Egyptians. This custom of sibling marriage, Cleopatra said, is an Egyptian tradition that spread to my ancestors. One of the constant misfortunes of the ancient Egyptian kings, who ruled before our dynasty, was that brothers and sisters married each other. As a result, the pharaohs of Egypt died young. If a pharaoh lived to be 40, it was considered an exceptional event. The average lifespan of the pharaohs was only 25 years. In our dynasty, too, the signs of degeneration have become evident. The foolishness of some of my ancestors, the physical weakness of my father, and my brother's frailty. All of this is due to the marriage of brother and sister. She paused, then added, I do not want to give birth to weak and foolish children. Cleopatra's brother turned to the priest and said, This is just an excuse. She will not openly say that I am weak, but now she claims that if she marries me, our offspring will be weak. But, O priest of the temple of Delphi, let me tell you the truth. My sister desires another man, and she is waiting for his arrival. The elderly priest was astonished by these words. He turned to Cleopatra and asked, Is what your brother says true? Do you desire another man? Cleopatra replied, Suppose that were the case. Have I committed a sin? The priest said, O Queen of Egypt, if you love another man, your sin is unforgivable in the eyes of the gods. Cleopatra asked, What if I had met that man and loved him before I was married to my brother? Would the gods still not forgive me? The priest replied, O Queen of Egypt, if you desired another man and your heart belonged to him, then you should not have married your brother. Cleopatra said, I did not want to marry my brother, but my father insisted on it. I had no choice but to obey. The priest replied, For that very reason, O Queen of Egypt, since you were forced to obey your father, it was your duty to remove the love of that man from your heart. Cleopatra looked away and said, O priest of Delphi, there is another matter. I do not know if you can understand or not. The elderly priest asked, What is it? Cleopatra explained, My brother Ptolemy and I grew up together. In our childhood we played together, and every night we slept in each other's arms until we grew up. The priest nodded and said, Yes, I am aware of this. Cleopatra continued, We became accustomed to being playmates, and after a lifetime of being companions, we cannot now become husband and wife. I have not been able to forget my childhood feelings. In the royal family, brothers and sisters are usually separated after infancy, so that later they will have a stronger inclination toward marriage. But every time I see my brother, I see my childhood playmate. I have never once been able to see him as my husband. The elderly priest turned to Ptolemy XIV and asked, O King of Egypt, how do you see your sister? Do you also see her as your childhood playmate whenever you look at her? Ptolemy replied, No, O priest of Delphi, whenever I see my sister, I see her as my wife. Cleopatra said, I do not want the heir to the throne of Egypt to be born from me. Tell my brother to divorce me and marry another woman so that a new heir may be born, and the Ptolemaic dynasty may continue. Ptolemy XIV said, I do not want to divorce Cleopatra because I love her. I am willing to wait because I know that in time she will regret her decision and change her mind. Eventually, she will agree to be my true wife. The priest of Delphi turned to Cleopatra and asked, Is your decision final? Do you refuse to be your husband's true wife and bear him children? Cleopatra answered, No, O priest. I do not want to be my brother's wife. This is not out of hatred for him. I love my brother, but whenever I think of him as my husband and imagine being intimate with him, I tremble with disgust. That is why my decision is final. I will not be his wife. At this moment, the priest turned to the king of Egypt and said, "If you are forced to separate from Cleopatra, you can marry your other sister, Arsinoe. She is willing to be your wife." Ptolemy XIII, with a tone of revulsion and horror, exclaimed, "Are you telling me to marry Arsinoe?" The intensity of his disgust made it clear. Just as Cleopatra detested the idea of marrying her brother, Ptolemy also loathed the idea of marrying Arsinoe. I do not know if Cleopatra heard what her brother said, or if she failed to notice the tone in his voice and understand how much he detested the thought of marrying Arsinoe. As soon as Cleopatra heard that her sister might become her brother's wife, she said, "Wait, do not issue the divorce decree yet. Wait for my decision." I realized that it was jealousy that made Cleopatra change her mind. But the moment Arsinoe's name was spoken, Cleopatra changed her decision and asked for 3 days to make her final choice. 3 days later, a grand celebration took place in Alexandria. To mark the completion of Cleopatra's marriage ceremony with Ptolemy XIV. On that day, while the entire city rejoiced and indulged in festivities, my lady Cleopatra did not leave the royal palace or pass through the city's streets. I knew the reason for her sorrow. She did not love her brother. But to prevent her sister Arsinoe from becoming his wife, she had agreed to marry him herself. Since she had done so unwillingly, she saw herself as miserable. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister, also remained inside the palace that day. But unlike Cleopatra, her reason was jealousy. She resented the fact that Cleopatra had become the wife of Ptolemy XIV, and therefore the Queen of Egypt. After Cleopatra officially became her husband's wife, the king of Egypt granted her command of the most distinguished legion of the Egyptian army, known as the Alexandrian Legion. I knew that Cal, holding the rank of centurion, served in that legion. On the first day that Cleopatra went to inspect her troops, I accompanied her in a litter. The circus was chosen as the site for the military review and parade. Since it was the largest open space in Alexandria, 6,000 soldiers of the Alexandrian Legion stood in formation, divided into 30 sections, each consisting of 2 centuries, with a centurion leading each century. At the circus, Cleopatra descended from her litter, mounted a horse, and reviewed the troops. Then came the turn of the soldiers to march in parade before the Queen of Egypt and their commander. Cleopatra turned to the legion commander and said, "A legion should not simply present arms and march past. If they do, their soldiers must be well dressed and march impeccably." As Cleopatra was speaking with the true commander of the legion, Cal passed before her with his century. She pointed him out to the commander and said, "Look at this young man. He marches in such a way that one would think he did not learn it here. This style of walking is not taught in this place. You can use this young officer to train your soldiers." Then she added, "After the parade, tell him to come to the royal palace this evening to see me." The commander replied, "As you command. I will inform him to visit you this evening." That evening, Cal entered the royal palace, walking as he always did, with his head held high, his chest puffed out, and his steps firm and measured. He made his way toward Cleopatra's chamber, and I quickly hurried to the palace myself to find out what my lady wished to discuss with the handsome young officer. As I approached, a eunuch who knew me stopped me and said, "The queen has ordered that no one enter her chamber." I replied, "I will not enter the queen's room. I will go to my own chamber." The eunuch leaned in and whispered, "Charmian, I know you are close to the queen, but I have a feeling she does not want anyone to hear what she discusses with this young officer." I quietly entered my chamber so the queen would not notice my presence. My room was adjacent to hers, so I could hear everything said inside. When the door to her chamber remained slightly open, I could even see what was happening. Once in my room, I heard Cleopatra say to Cal, "I have brought you here to tell you that my legion soldiers need training. In the past, all of Alexander's soldiers and my ancestors' warriors walked as you do. Are you willing to train my troops so that they can march like you?" Cal replied. "For the soldiers to march in a way that pleases your majesty, they must engage in physical training." Cleopatra said, "I grant you permission to train them in physical exercises as well." Cleopatra smiled and asked, "Do you know how handsome you are? Can you recognize the extent of your own charm? A person blessed with beauty should value this wealth and not give it away freely. To give it away freely means to accept every woman's request. You should only accept the request of a woman who either matches you in beauty or surpasses all others in rank and status." Cal replied, "O great lady, if a woman were to appear who is both the most beautiful among all and superior in rank to every other woman, what then? Should one accept her request or not?" From Cleopatra's laughter, I knew that the young officer's words had pleased her. After that, I heard conversations from the queen's chamber that made me cover my ears. I did not want to hear what was being exchanged between Cal and Cleopatra. After that day, Cal frequently came to the royal palace to see Cleopatra. I should mention, after Cleopatra became the honorary commander of the legion, some of its officers would visit her on certain days. Therefore, the arrival of a centurion officer from the Alexandrian legion at the royal palace in Egypt was considered normal, and no one found it unusual. Several months after these events, Cleopatra became pregnant, and when her pregnancy term ended, she gave birth to a son. Everyone believed that the boy was the son of Ptolemy XIV. However, only one person knew that the child was actually Cal's. After Cleopatra gave birth to a son, any resentment between her and her brother disappeared because Ptolemy XIV was convinced that the newborn was his own. But Cal, who continued visiting the royal palace after the child's birth, realized that the boy was his, not Ptolemy XIII's. Sometime later, a day before Cal was to visit Cleopatra's palace, Lady M summoned me and said, "Charmian, be careful. After Cal arrives today, take him to your room and tell him on my behalf that he must never set foot in the royal palace again." I asked, "If he asks why, what should I tell him?" She replied, "Tell him that last night," my brother said. "Who is this young centurion officer who comes to you so often? Military reports and other official matters are presented once a month, not daily. Why has this man been coming to the royal palace for nearly a year now to submit reports? Has he not yet managed to train your legion soldiers properly in all this time? My brother has grown suspicious of Cal. He must no longer come to the royal palace. I will find a reason to visit the barracks myself and inform him where we can meet again. That day, I stood in a place where I knew Cal would pass by. He arrived at the designated time, walking with his usual firm stride, so focused that he did not see me until I stepped toward him. Cal, surprised by my sudden appearance, said, "Charmian, is that you?" "It seems you have something to tell me," I replied. "Yes, I need to speak with you. Come to my room so we can talk." Cal said, "I must go to the Queen now to deliver my report. Afterward, I will come see you and hear what you have to say." I told him, "What I need to tell you concerns the Queen. She has ordered me to deliver a message to you." Hearing this, Cal said, "In that case, let's go. I am ready to hear the message." I took Cal to my room and told him, "You must not come to the royal palace anymore." Cal was taken aback by this and asked, "Why am I not allowed to come to the royal palace?" I explained, "Because Cleopatra's brother has become suspicious of you. He believes that your visits are not just to deliver reports, but that there is another reason behind them." Cal said, "Hearing this news saddens me." I replied, "It's clear that you love Cleopatra very much. If you didn't, you wouldn't be so troubled by this news." Cal responded, "It is not because I will no longer see Cleopatra that I am troubled. I know I will still see her when she comes to inspect the Legion." But I asked, "Then why are you upset about the Queen's new order?" Cal answered, "Because if I can no longer come to the royal palace, I will not be able to see Cleopatra's child anymore." I asked, "Is Cleopatra's child so dear to you that not seeing him upsets you?" Cal said, "Yes, because I have seen him since the day he was born, and I love him as if he were my own son." I asked, "Cal, have you noticed that the older this boy gets, the more he resembles you?" Cal said, "That is because Cleopatra used to see me often while she was pregnant. That is why the child in her womb took on my likeness." I replied, "This resemblance is not just a vague similarity. It clearly shows that you are the child's father." Cal sighed and said, "Charmian, you are right. The truth is, I am the father of this child." He continued, "I will not come here anymore, but I dearly wish to see my son. Would it be possible for you to take the child out of the royal palace someday, so I can see him?" I said, "I cannot do that without permission. This child is the heir to Egypt's throne. He is meant to become Ptolemy 15 one day. A child who is the crown prince of Egypt cannot be taken out of the royal palace without the approval of the king and queen. If they allow it, I will bring him outside so you can see him. But if they do not, there is nothing I can do." Cal said, "He is Cleopatra's child, but he is not Ptolemy XIII's son. He is my son. That is why I long to see him every day. If you tell me which days you will take him outside, I can meet you and hold my son in my arms." I warned him, "Given that the king of Egypt is suspicious of you, if he sees you near me and the child outside the palace, it will put me in great danger. And if the king does not punish me, Cleopatra surely will. You know that the punishment for disobedient servants and slaves in the royal palace is terrifying." I knew I should not accept Cal's request, but because I wanted to please him, I ultimately agreed. Cleopatra entrusted her son to me with confidence, allowing me to soothe him, put him to sleep, or take him for walks in the royal garden. He too loved the child. Not because he was Cleopatra's son, but because I knew he was Cal's. Cal wanted me to take the child out of the palace twice a week so he could see him, but I explained that this was not possible and that he would have to settle for once a week. Cal agreed, and we decided that every Saturday I would take the child out of the royal palace and bring him to a secluded place where Cal could see him. The time for the meeting was set. I would take the child out of the palace, bring him to Cal, and he would hold his son in his arms and speak with me for a while before I returned to the palace. When I was heading back to the royal palace, Cal would follow me from a distance, but he never approached the gates. Once I entered with the child, he would turn back. It was a dangerous task, but I did it for Cal. One day Cal said, "Charmian, I have a request for you. I want you to help me keep my child with me at all times." I asked, "Do you intend to take your child home? Do you really expect me to give you the child of the Queen of Egypt? Suppose you take the child away from Alexandria. What would happen to me, who cannot leave the city? I would suffer the most severe punishments. They would either burn me alive, crucify me, or throw me to the wild lions in the royal zoo. If you do this, you are not acting against what is right, but you would be going against the law. Because according to the law, the king of Egypt is considered the child's father, not you." Cal said, "That is exactly why I must outsmart the law, to take my child home, and no longer be forced to see my own son in secret, like a thief." I asked, "How do you plan to deceive the law?" Cal said, "I know that the child has a wet nurse in the royal palace and drinks milk from her breast, not from Cleopatra's." I said, "Yes, that is true," Cal continued. "Cleopatra rarely sees her son and does not cradle him in her arms at night. The child, sleeping next to his wet nurse, has bonded with her and has no strong attachment to his mother. Therefore, if we switch the child, Cleopatra will not even notice that her son has been replaced." I said, "Cal, what you are suggesting is outrageous. How can a child be switched?" Cal replied, "It is simple. Every day, the Nile brings forth several abandoned infants, some of whom survive. I will take one of these children from the river, bring him here, dress him in my son's clothes, and you will return him to the royal palace. Meanwhile, I will take my own child home with me." I said, "Even if no one else notices the switch, the wet nurse will. How can you possibly find a child who looks so much like this one, in both appearance and age, that the wet nurse, the mother, and everyone else will be deceived?" Cal said, "I will make sure to find, among the infants brought by the Nile, one who closely resembles my son." I told Cal to give me some time to think about the plan and to determine whether it would be possible to replace the child. I needed to speak with the wet nurse and find out if she would be able to recognize the child after the switch. Could she remember the color of his eyes? Would she recall the texture of his hair? Did she know the shape of his hands and feet? If she remembered these details, the switch would be risky, and she would immediately tell Cleopatra. I feared the wet nurse more than Cleopatra herself, because I knew that the Queen of Egypt was not constantly with her child to notice gradual changes in his appearance. So I memorized the child's distinguishing features. And the next day, while he was asleep, I spoke with the wet nurse. During our conversation, I mentioned that Cleopatra's son's eyes were beautiful and hazel-colored, just like his mother's. The wet nurse agreed. I was astonished by her response, because Cleopatra's son did not have hazel eyes. His eyes were black. Cleopatra and her sister Arsinoe had hazel eyes, though with slight differences in shade. However, Cleopatra's son's eyes resembled those of his father, Cal. When I realized that the wet nurse did not even know the eye color of the child she nursed daily, I understood that if the child were switched, she would not notice. A woman foolish enough not to recognize the color of the eyes of the baby she fed would certainly not remember the finer details of his features.